beginning of this forage conference series this week. Just like a little child anticipates coming down the stairs on Christmas morning, I find myself, this is the 10th year I've been involved with this conference series, and each year it seems to get more and more exciting to me. So it's great to be here with all of you. We actually have signed up a capacity crowd of 163 registered guests today. Some are still trickling in, but it's great to be here this morning with you at this conference series. Having said all that, the theme of today's conference is alternative forages, but specifically alternative forages for grazing systems, unlocking your farm's production potential. So when we consider alternative forages, you know, we first need to consider, well, what's a traditional forage, right? If we're saying we need to think about alternatives, well, the way I look at it, traditional forages is what we mainly have planted in our pasture land acres across the state. And the fact is, about 99% of our pasture land acres across the state are established to cool season perennial grasses, right? Now, you might say, well, what's wrong with that? The fact is, we have a lot of positive attributes with our cool season perennial pastures. And basically, when you have all of your acres planted to one main plant functional group, what it does, it kind of makes things easy. It keeps it simple, right? If you're not managing lots of different types of things, it just makes the process easy. And overall, there are fewer surprises. You're less likely to make mistakes. You understand what you're doing. You do it well. And the bottom line is we can typically get a lot of good growth and production out of our cool season pastures during certain times of the year. In addition to that, when you're managing them well, all in all, we get good ground cover. And a lot of our forages in our cool season pastures can really take a beating and recover during periods of, after the stress is gone. So one might ask, why in the world would we consider any other type of forages? Well, you need to ask yourself, are you missing out on something? All right? The problem with doing things the same way year in, year out with the same type of things is sometimes it can lead us to become complacent or even lazy. You don't want to miss out on an opportunity of a new technological development or a new forage variety that may have a significant place in your forage system and your production enterprise. So you always need to be thinking about what's new or what hasn't been tried that I can try that will fit within my production system. Because you don't want to fall behind, and you don't want to fall behind on the bottom line either. This statement right here I can say with great confidence as I look out across this room. Many of you are already great producers. I've been to a handful of your farms, and I just know that the type of producers that come to these conferences that are engaged in these type of educational events, and what I see many of you have implemented on your farm operations, you're in the top tier of production. Many of you have already addressed soil fertility issues. You've limed and fertilized. You're feeding the plants what they need to have a thick, dense, and vigorous sod in your pastures. In addition to that, many of you have already addressed the competition that's fighting for nutrients and sunlight with your forages. You've taken care of the weeds, gotten rid of the brush, and many of you have taken the additional step of implementing some type of improved grazing management on your farm. So you're doing all the right things stepwise to increase your level of production. But at the same time, despite these accomplishments that you've already made, many of you recognize there's still limitations to your production system. All right? So I think some of that is attributed to the fact that almost all of people's acres are dedicated to cool season perennial mix. Okay? That's predominantly fescue with a little orchard grass and or Kentucky bluegrass mixed in there, some Dutch white clover, or some of you obviously have established some legumes. You're trying to manage higher amounts of those in your system. But still, if we're looking at when that forage is produced, if you've got all your pasture acres and cool season perennials, then you need to think about that production over the course of the calendar year, as we see, or I'll show right here in this slide. Basically, for our fescue and orchard grass and bluegrass and some timothy, we're getting the bulk of our production in the spring and the fall. So even though we have an potential 8-month growing season, all right, because of the species we've got planted and how they perform based on the temperature and moisture, almost all of that is limited to 5 to 6 months throughout that calendar year right there. So what this does in the big scheme of things, I think it has a limiting effect on your carrying capacity. Now granted, I recognize many of you take a lot of this excess right here in a spring hay cut, and you store that for feeding later in the year. But at the same time, when we get into the summer, depending on the moisture situation, we're feeding some of it then because we run short in many cases. And then in the fall, a lot of you have implemented the advanced technique of stockpiling the forage in the fall, and you shift that production by being able to graze it on into the winter, that's those stockpiled acres. And that's an advanced management technique. But in addition to this, we're still faced with the fact that the bulk of our production is limited to right here and right here if we've got all our proverbial eggs in one basket, being cool season perennial grasses. So somebody here might be thinking right now, hey, somebody should develop a forage species that produces as much growth in the summertime as our fescue grows in the spring and the fall, right? Well, then they'd have to be reminded by a wise guy like Mr. Kimball, don't you know, they already exist. So the question comes back to being, if forage species already exist that will grow just as vigorously in the summer as our cool season does in the spring and the fall, then why is it we go back to the fact that we've got 99% plus of our pasture land all dedicated to cool season perennials? The fact is we have lots of different forage options to choose from. Everybody remembers that movie Forrest Gump, right? Many of you have seen that in years past. Remember Forrest's buddy that he met in the military, Bubba Gump? You remember Bubba? Bubba knew everything about all the different ways to prepare shrimp, right? Shrimp Creole, shrimp gumbo, shrimp cocktail. Well, we've got almost just as many options with forages here in the state of Virginia as Bubba had with shrimp in Louisiana, okay? I contend that, you know, we got annual forages, we got perennial forages, we've got legumes for forages, and we've got natives for forages. And within each one of these separate categories, there's few to many different forage options within each one of those different functional group categories of plants that has the potential to greatly diversify the production during the calendar year on your farm operation. So, you got to really think, due to the situation that we have in the state of Virginia, we've got lots of different options, but this really became clear to me back in 2009 when USDA sent me out to Oklahoma to go through some initial conservation training. I went out there and we were working on a conservation planning project with a rancher just outside of Oklahoma City. And it dawned on me when we got out there planting that he had red soils, he had some improved pasture land, some range land, but the fact was his carrying capacity was limited based on soil types and climate. And it took him approximately 20 acres of his pasture and or range land to be able to support a cow-calf pair where he was located. And going through that process out there, it really opened to my mind of what great opportunities that we have where we're located here in the Mid-Atlantic region in Virginia with the deep fertile soils that we have across much of our open land across the state. With a relatively long growing season that we experience here depending on where you are in the state, combined with the ample rainfall needed to grow abundant forages throughout the growing season. The fact is we've got many opportunities we're blessed with, far greater than other producers in certain areas of the U.S. So, everybody needs to be challenged periodically. It's good for me, I think it's good for each of you. One of the missions of the Forage Council is in fact to challenge you by bringing expert speakers from across the nation into a conference like this. And today, the Forage Council is challenging you to open your mind to learn more about possibly using one or more of these alternative forages that are going to be presented and talked about. And we ask you to listen closely to what the speakers on the program today are going to go into detail about. And just consider how you might use it on your operation. And the purpose of this very short opening presentation is to really focus you on the theme of today, that being alternative forages. I was not intended to go into detail on the different types and options. That's going to be covered in depth in the rest of the program. All right? But I'm excited to say, because of your involvement as a member in the Virginia Forage and Grassland Council and the industry support we have in the sponsors that are dedicated and support this program each year, we were able to invite in two of the foremost experts in different areas of looking at different areas of alternative forages. Glad to say we've got Dr. Matt Poore on the program today from NC State University. Dr. Poore has been very involved in the last 10 plus years looking at the use of annual forages in livestock production systems. I've been there to the beef unit just outside of Raleigh, NC State. I've seen a lot of what he's done there. In addition, through his grazing program, extension grazing program across North Carolina, they've implemented or demonstrated the use of some of these alternatives on farms across the state. In addition to that, I've seen and been to his farm in the edge of Virginia where he uses these techniques and practices in his own production system. Likewise, later in the program, you will get to hear from Dr. Pat Kaiser. Dr. Kaiser is the director of the Center for Native Grasslands Management at the University of Tennessee. In the past 11 or 12 years, he's done as much for applied research and demonstration of using native forages in grazing systems on research centers across the state as well as farms across Tennessee as anybody else that you could think of. So we're really happy to have these two experts on the program today. I encourage you to take the cap off of that pen or whatever that's sitting beside you, listen closely, and get ready to soak in all this information. But I caution you, okay? When you leave here today, some of you are going to be very excited about what you've heard. Don't go home and try to implement everything, all right? Soak it all in, and you listen carefully for the top one or two things that you think might fit your production system better than anything else you hear today. And focus in on that, and talk to these gentlemen on the breaks and afterwards to see how you might be able to implement it best to benefit you and your bottom line on your farm. Thank you.